Should Valve really be worried about the Aya Neo Air? How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Deck Ready, the channel all about the Steam Deck and other PC handhelds. Because in today's video, on top of the Steam Deck news, I also have been playing around with the Aya Neo Air over the past week or so, and I have some thoughts on it. So whether you've been here before or if you're a new person to the channel, it would really help me out if you click the subscribe button and set your notifications to all. Also, thanks for getting me to 20K. I really appreciate it. So now that the Steam Deck is coming out over in Asia, Valve has been super talkative about the future of the device. They put out that little book I talked about in my last video. Lawrence Yang just did a really cool interview about the history of the device over on my friend Jake's podcast, Friends Per Second. I really highly recommend listening to that conversation because he goes in depth on the start to finish development of this device, and it was super interesting. And over in Japan, a guy named Greg Coomer, who works at Valve, just did an interview with Famitsu, and he said that the next generation of the Steam Deck might even become a streaming machine. Now, initially, I'm not gonna lie, that kind of surprised me when I read it in the headline, but of course, I clicked into the PC Gamer article and then I went back to the original interview and I read it with context, and it's immediately clear that this is not meant to be like the Steam Deck 2. If it even ever happens, this would be something supplemental to a Steam Deck 2, and that kind of makes sense because if you listen to that Friends Per Second podcast that has the interview with Lawrence Yang, if I remember correctly, he was making it super clear that the idea behind the Steam Deck was to make the device that their users want. That's why they allow having extra stores on the device like the Epic Game Store and even GOG to some extent. They want to make sure that you can use this thing how you want to use it and not create a walled garden by, say, making it a streaming machine that only lets you stream games from your more powerful PC to the device. I guess also the context here is that they were talking about ways in which they can improve the battery life of the Steam Deck, because when it came out earlier this year, they said that they were going to work on making sure updates improve the battery life over time. And while, yeah, there have been some marginal updates to the battery life, I would say it's on par with what we've seen at the beginning of this thing's life cycle, but still, I don't think the battery is nearly as bad as people make it out to be. To be fair, I play a lot of indie games on it like Dead Cells and Hollow Knight recently, and also Midnight Fight Express, and none of those games really take up that much battery, and even when I'm emulating stuff like Pokemon Soul Silver, the battery works just fine and lasts up to 3 or 4 hours with games like that. So yeah, I haven't had much issue with the Steam Deck, and I'm not even one of those people who like turns down the brightness or turns off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth when I'm not using it. I use the device as it was intended to be used because those are the features that have me playing the Steam Deck in the first place, right? Like, I want to be able to take advantage of everything it has to offer. But yeah, I saw a ton of articles that said, yeah, the Steam Deck is going to be a streaming machine in its next generation, and I don't think that's going to be the case. At most, I think that would be a supplemental device to whatever the Steam Deck 2 is, because the Steam Deck is supposed to be your all-in-one gaming PC. It's not supposed to be something that you need a gaming PC at home to use it with. It's not meant to be a device like the Valve Index or the Oculus Rift where you need to be tethered to your PC to really take advantage of it. Like, yeah, it is nice having a nice gaming PC at home where I can play games that don't run super well on the Steam Deck like Ghostwire Tokyo, or to some extent Dying Light 2 and Horizon Zero Dawn. Those all work great on my regular gaming PC. That's just like such a small handful of games that I prefer to play on my main PC versus the Steam Deck, and honestly, if I didn't have my main PC, I think I could totally use the Steam Deck as my main gaming device and it would be just fine. So to completely gut the thing and turn it into a streaming machine that completely relies on you having Wi-Fi, I just don't see the utility there, especially as someone who's tried Xbox Game Pass streaming on a bunch of different devices on a bunch of different internet connections. Like here in LA at my apartment, I have pretty good internet. It's nothing incredible. It gets 400 down and like 200 up, and that's well outside what you need on a lot of these streaming services like Xbox Game Pass streaming and GeForce Now, and I've tried all of them. I don't think the experience is anything I would write home about, and also it's nothing I would use outside of like my Xbox Series X or my PC or my PS5. Like, that technology is never going to be better, and having a device like the Steam Deck where I can just play the games on the actual Steam Deck, that's infinitely more preferable to me than having something that's even cheaper, like $200 maybe, and has the exact same screen layout and control layout but can't actually play games. A device like that, to me personally, has virtually zero utility. I'm just going to be real. So yeah, long story short, if you saw that article and got worried that the Steam Deck 2 is going to be a streaming device that can't actually natively play games, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Next up, it's the end of August. Well, it's the beginning of September. It's September 1st when I'm filming this video, and Valve just put out a list of all of the biggest games on the Steam Deck in August, and it's a pretty good list. So the number one most played game on the Steam Deck in August was Vampire Survivors. This is like the $2 game that's kind of like a roguelite where you run around, you're a little pixelated vampire, and you pick up different power-ups and level up and get super powerful, and this game is amazing. I have put so much time into it. My friend Jake, who I mentioned earlier in the video, is the one who turned me on to it, and yeah, it's like basically the perfect Steam Deck game, especially if you're just looking for a game to kill some time. It costs $2 on Steam, and they add stuff all the time to it, and it gets better and better, so I'm not surprised to see that at the top of the list. Next is Cult of the Lamb, which honestly I'm surprised to see at the top of the list. I know it's like a big seller, and I honestly really like the game, but that is a game I have opted to play on my main gaming PC because it doesn't run very well on the Steam Deck. Like when you're in the dungeon, you get a little bit of frame drops that you can kind of fix by setting it to 40 hertz and 40 FPS, but when you're in the actual little cult town, there's a stutter that happens every 10 seconds, and it's super irritating if you're sensitive to stutter because the game lurches forward, and especially when it happens on the exact 10th second, it creates a pattern. And if you're one of those people like me who doesn't like stuttering and also doesn't like repeated issues in games that just like immediately take you out of it, to me the game is just unplayable. And I know that might seem a little bit harsh to some people who either can't recognize stutter or it doesn't affect them, but for people like me who need games to run at a constant frame rate, like I will always take a constant 30 FPS over like a fluctuating 40 to 60. I just can't handle frame drops. It's just unplayable to me. So yeah, while it's nice to know that the game is selling well and the devs have been patching it a lot, I'm honestly shocked to see it that high on the list, knowing that it has performance issues like it does. And honestly, I have no idea when it's going to be fixed because this is like the one issue on the Steam discussion forums that the devs just won't acknowledge. Third place, no surprise, Elden Ring. That's like the biggest game of the year. Following that is Spider-Man Remastered, another not really too surprising game. It is verified for Steam Deck at launch and generally runs really well. They've also updated the game a couple times specifically for Steam Deck, so that's an awesome move on Insomniac and Nix's part. After that, Stardew Valley, No Man's Sky, two great games on the Steam Deck. Not surprised to see them there. The game that's arguably advertised the most on the Steam Deck, Hades, is next. I put a ton of time into Hades. I like it a lot. I don't think I'll ever really beat that game. There's just something about it that doesn't make it feel like it plays as well as Dead Cells to me. Then Multiverses, Skyrim Special Edition, and Monster Hunter Rise. If you've played any of these games, like if you take this list and pick up one game on it, you're gonna have a great time. This is a great list of games. Again, the only one on here I would avoid until it's fixed, and I'll let you know when it's fixed because I really want to play it on Steam Deck, is Cult of the Lamb. It's just not playable to me right now with the insane stutter that happens in the cult. And for the last part of today's video, let's talk about this, the Aya Neo Air. So I've had this thing for about a week now and I've played a few games on it, but the real thing I wanted to try out right out of the gate was Destiny 2, because while I can play it on my Steam Deck by using my Windows 11 micro SD card, this thing has Windows 11 like built into it already, and it's made to run on Windows 11, and that's the one game that I really wanted to play on a handheld. I'll talk about the performance in a minute because I want to talk about the hardware first. This thing is really solid. The sticks are really good because it uses Hall sensors, which will never get stick drift, and that's the same case here. The sticks feel really good. I've heard that the triggers use them on both the Next and the Air. The triggers are where I had the most hardware issues though. Both of the triggers failed on the Aya Neo Next within the span of like 2 weeks, and I am not very tough on my consoles, and this device feels like it uses the exact same triggers, so that's where I'm gonna knock it from a hardware perspective. But other than that, this thing is a huge step up. It feels good to hold in the hand. Obviously they're using the Switch Lite as their reference point, and they hit it. They knocked it out of the park. They did a great job as far as I'm concerned. It's thin, it feels great in the hand, and the only issue I really have with the hardware comes down to the screen. Now the screen looks amazing. It's a 1080p OLED panel. The issue is this thing is not powerful enough to play most games at 1080p. So you could say, oh, you'll just change the resolution to 720p in Windows, and that's where you run into issues. There's an app on this thing called Aya Space. Every Aya device has it. It lets you change the performance profiles on the machine between like balanced, power saving, game mode, boost mode. It also lets you change the fans, and when you change it to 720p with Aya Space, or even change it in the display settings of Windows, it breaks pretty much every app you want to use. Like Steam will not fill the screen for me if I'm in 720p, and if I change a game in the game from 1080p to 720p, when I go back to the desktop, Aya Space is not scaled right, and I can't close it because the taskbar also completely disappears when you change Windows to 720p in a game. So your options really are run games poorly at 1080p or change it to 720 and get decent performance, but then you basically have to restart the entire console when you're done playing a game. It's not the end of the world or anything, and I'm sure they'll figure out how to fix that in a software update. It's just been the most annoying aspect of using this thing from the moment I picked it up. The other big annoyance I have is just heat dissipation and battery life. So if you want to play a game like Destiny 2, which I'm assuming a lot of people do because of how many people agree with me on the Deck Ready videos where I talk about wanting to play Destiny on the Steam Deck, you're going to have to put this thing in wild fan mode and boost mode. This one has a Ryzen 5560U, and I think that's why it costs $600. And for that $600, you're also getting 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage, but there's a pro model. There's multiple pro models. There's multiple of every model. They use multiple different parts and have multiple different prices. You got to check the Indiegogo and just see all these different versions. But the best one you can get has a Ryzen 5825U, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and 2 terabytes of storage, but it costs $1,200. That's the one where I think you could keep it at least balanced mode and still get decent performance out of Destiny. But on this thing, you have to max it out. You got to put it on the highest performance spec possible, and you have to run the game at the lowest possible settings at 720p to get 30 frames per second. And it's not a locked 30, it'll mostly stay at 30, but when you use your super, when you're using a weapon like Storm Chaser that has a lot of visual effects, you'll see it drop to like 27, 24 FPS, and it's really up to you on whether or not that would be considered unplayable. I would put it like right on the edge of playable. It's over the line, but just barely. So yeah, that was a little bit disappointing that you have to keep it maxed out performance-wise because it gets extremely hot, like hot to the touch where if you leave your finger on it for too long on the back of the device, it's not going to burn you, but it'll cause you like actual pain. And also the battery life is like a little over an hour when you're playing Destiny 2. That's just like not going to work for me on a handheld. You basically need a battery bank with this thing if you want to play AAA games. If you're looking for a device to emulate stuff on or play smaller indie games, like specifically 2D games like Dead Cells, that's where I could see a lot of the utility of the Aya Neo Air, but I can also play those games on my Steam Deck, and the overall price of that device is a lot cheaper. I know it's not apples to apples because Valve is selling the Steam Deck at a loss, but me, as the consumer, when I look at the prices of these things, the $600 version of the Aya Neo Air does not perform nearly as well as the $400 version of the Steam Deck, which is just a fact of what the reality is that we're living in. And it's not really doing anything to make it feel like a ripoff at $600. Like, the hardware is built well, Windows 11 works well enough. You obviously have Steam and the Epic Game Store and GOG, where you can play pretty much any game you can think of across the board. It has 2 USB-C ports, which I love, one on the top, one on the bottom, so you can keep it docked and charging at the same time. I like the way the hardware looks with this cool white finish and the two-tone like pink to blue that it has going on at the top of the console, which you can see right here. It's not too heavy, the sticks light up, which is pretty cool, and they feel pretty good to use. It's just like, at the end of the day, you got to consider what you're buying it for, because if you want to buy an Aya Neo Air because you like the form factor, you should buy the $1,200 version, or at least get one of the versions that has the 5825U, because that's where you're going to be able to get decent performance and a bigger battery, because that's where you're going to see decent performance, but the battery life won't technically take too much of a hit because there's a bigger battery in that device. And if you're someone who does play a lot of emulated games and also a lot of smaller indie games, and you love the form factor of the Switch Lite, I think you can go for that $600 Aya Neo Air or Aya Neo Air Pro. There's a bunch of different names. You'll see it on the Indiegogo, and you'll probably be pretty happy with it. Like, if the Steam Deck really does seem too big for you and you need a smaller form factor device, this seems like a good option for you. It's just like, for me and what I'm using this thing for, the heat, the battery life, and the OLED screen not really working well with Windows being a 1080p screen, all of those kind of add up to make me go, yeah, I think I'll stick with my Steam Deck. But that's just me.